Now from the war abroad to the war on the home front in America and how it's being treated by the media. To talk about this, I'm joined by U.S. Report regular Batya Ungar-Sargon, Deputy Opinion Editor at Newsweek. Batya, thanks so much for coming on the program this week. And first of all, I have to ask you, how are you and your family going during this horrific time?
Wow, thank you so much for asking that, James. By the grace of God, my family in Israel have been spared. But of course, everybody feels like family right now. This has been a very, very difficult week for the Jewish community globally, although of course the Israelis are the front lines of this, and not just Israeli Jews, Israeli Arabs, Israeli Druze. The butchers were indiscriminate in their murdering spree. So thank you very much for asking. We're holding it together and we're standing strong.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. And you're, of course, in New York City right now. And I've seen the police have now been ordered on duty, the entire force, essentially, amidst a Hamas call for a global day of rage. What's the mood there in Manhattan, in New York City? And are the cops going to shut down any terrorist sympathizer protests? We've already seen a few little things flare up, but what's the vibe in New York now?
You know, we pride ourselves on our First Amendment here. We don't shut down protests unless they seem like they're going to get violent. The bar for meeting incitement is extremely high legally in America, I'm proud to say, as a very proud American. So I don't foresee them shutting down protests. The mood is the way that one of my friends phrased it was, on the one hand, we are not Jews of trembling knees. We are not afraid. This is our country, and we're not going to cower from these cowards. On the other hand, people with children are feeling very worried about sending them to school tomorrow. What do you do when there's a global assault, a threat on your children, on your people because of your ethnicity? So I would say we're sort of caught betwixt and between, on the one hand, standing strong, very proud, and not bowing and not giving in at all, but on the other hand, very much alert about the potential for something.
Yeah, and indeed, I've seen some terrible things, too, also out of Washington and some of the apologists almost for this butchery in Israel. And one of the worst things, I want to get your thoughts on this, was Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, and she's a well-known critic of Israel, as we know. And here is some video of her refusing to condemn these senseless attacks on innocent civilians. Have a look at this, because I want to show our viewers this and get your reaction.
We can't comment about Hamas terrorists chopping off babies' heads. Congresswoman, do you have a comment on Hamas terrorists chopping off babies' heads?
I mean, imagine, Batya, running from that question and not stopping and saying, this is some of the purest evil we've seen in a century.
It's unthinkable. It is unthinkable. The abdication of moral responsibility on the left is just horrific. But thankfully, James, what we're seeing is a level of just absolute rage at these congresswomen who are unable to simply stand up and condemn butchery like we haven't seen since the Nazis. There is, on the left, a huge outcry against this. They do not represent the Democratic Party. They do not represent even the left. This is a tiny, woke minority that has been exposed for having no morals whatsoever. And so that at least is a tiny silver lining, that people are seeing these people for who they are, moral cowards who cannot bring themselves to condemn the most heinous, vicious, disgusting assault on humanity.
And indeed, though, I have to stay on this Rashida Tlaib person, though, for a minute, because I just think she's so morally bankrupt. I found this clip from a couple of years ago when she was putting on the fake tears and the fake outrage about kids at the U.S.-Mexican border. Have a look at this.
Mr. Chairman, it needs to be noted into record. I spoke to CPB agents, even though they told us not to speak to them too. Remember that? And I said, what do you think we need to do, because you guys are overwhelmed?
Almost worthy of an Oscar there, but I mean, doesn't that just show you the kind of moral bankruptcy that we're dealing with?
You know, for some reason, and somebody not Jewish will have to explain to me why, when it comes to Jewish victims, it is impossible for the left to see them as victims. And so every time a member of the squad has said something about this for the last week, they have only been able to condemn Hamas in the context of also calling out either some Jewish protester or Israel for what it's doing to protect its citizens from terrorism. That equivocation between butchers who chop the heads off of babies, set babies on fire. Can you imagine the moral equivocation between that and the people trying to stop more of it? This is where their heads have gone. This is where their mentality is at. It is unforgivable, and we are not going to forgive it. And I don't just mean me, we, the Jewish people. I mean the left more generally has woken up from a stupor and is really calling this out as well. And that is heartening to see, James.
Well, and I have started to see some people, especially also within the sort of the progressive Jewish wing of politics, say that they've suddenly realized that, you know, they have a lot of people on the left who actually aren't their friends. And we're seeing this now, particularly with all of these calls for sort of restraint and so on by Israel. But, you know, in the face of what we've seen over the last week, it just seems like they're trying to draw terrible moral equivalence. Some people are.
Yeah, they really cannot understand the difference between the butchers and the people trying to stop more butchery. And I'll explain to you why, James. It's because in the woke mentality, you don't judge things based on right versus wrong. You judge them based on powerful versus powerless. And then you take race and you superimpose it. So the people of color are always powerless and thus virtuous. And the people who you consider to be white are the powerful and thus inherently evil and compromised. That is how the left for a long time has seen Israel. They code Israel as white, even though most of the Jews there are of Arab descent and look exactly like the Arabs who live in Israel. And thus they say Israel is the powerful one, and thus Israel has no right to defend itself against Hamas because they have slightly less power than Israel, which has a military. Therefore, they are the virtuous and they have to be on their sides. That is the mind virus called wokeness.
And Batya, there was a great example of this. The New York Times was caught out, and I thought this was something almost right out of 1984, you know, the changing of words, because they were caught out changing the language in one of their stories online, and you can go back and find it, and they went from calling them Hamas terrorists to Hamas gunmen. I mean, would this be an example of what you're talking about here, trying to basically sanitize this Hamas butchery?
Well, I have to a little bit defend them on the grounds that they might have a house style. And if that is the house style, then they have to adhere to it. But, you know, it's probably time to revisit that house style at this point. These are not militants. These are people who committed crimes against humanity of the level we haven't seen since the Nazis. And we have to be able to call that for what it is. The New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, be clowning themselves, going out of their way to create moral equivalency between Nazi butchers and people trying to stop those Nazi butchers from having their way again. And it's really time for us to be able to say, enough is enough. We said never again, and yet never again happened again right now.
Batya, Ungar-Sargon, thank you so much for joining us at this horrible time. Stay safe and best wishes to your entire family. Thank you so much.